I didn't even make it to the front door. I'm standing there on a gravel drive with a coffee mug in one hand and my keys in the other, staring at a woman in a blazer who is screaming like I just robbed a bank. "Get off this land right now," she yells, jabbing a clipboard at my chest like it's a badge. Behind her, two SUVs roll up with amber lights flashing, and grown adults in reflective vests hop out like they're about to cordon off a crime scene. And I remember thinking, this is either the weirdest welcome party in the world, or I just walked into somebody else's delusion. Because here's the part she didn't know yet. I had the deed in my pocket. My name on it. My family's name on the taxes. The land under her heels was mine. 3 years earlier, my dad got sick. Fast. The kind of sick where everything happens in 6 months, and you're trying to be strong while your whole life quietly reorganizes itself around hospital visits and paperwork. He'd held on to this rural parcel outside a little town called Bryan County for decades, not because it was glamorous, but because it was home. A meadow, a creek line, a pump shed, and a mailbox shelter out by the road that served a small subdivision called Maple Hollow. Dad used to say, "This land is boring until it's valuable, and then everyone suddenly has an opinion." After he passed, I didn't have it in me to deal with the property right away. Grief does that. So for a while, I kept paying the taxes and letting the place sit, thinking I'd come back when I could breathe. Then my neighbor from way back, a woman named Tessa, called me out of the blue. "Hey," she said, like she was trying not to laugh. "When are you coming home, landlord?" I said, "Landlord? I'm not a landlord." Tessa snorted. "Oh, you are. You just don't know it yet. There's a lady down here running Maple Hollow like it's her kingdom, and she's been doing it on your land. Half the neighborhood thinks they're paying fees for community facilities that technically sit on your parcel." I didn't know whether to get angry or confused. "What facilities?" I asked. "The mailbox shelter, the pump shed, and this little gravel pull-off she calls chairwoman parking," Tessa said, and I could hear her smiling through the phone. "She's gonna have a stroke when she finds out whose name is on the deed." That should have been my warning. I should have driven down there ready, documents printed, lawyer on standby, game face on. Instead, I came down like a normal human being, with a moving truck scheduled for noon, a coffee mug, and grief still clinging to me like dust. I wanted a quiet reset. I wanted to walk the perimeter, check the shed, maybe sit on the porch and remember my dad without a stranger in a blazer yelling at me. But the second I stepped out of my car, I heard it. "Get off this land." I turned and saw her. Not Karen. Not in my story. In mine, her name is Celeste Brigham. And Celeste was the kind of person who looked like she had never been told no without immediately filing a complaint. Tight ponytail, pearl earrings, blazer buttoned like armor, clipboard held high like it had the power of the state. She marched up my drive like she was storming a beach. Behind her, a guy in a neon vest started stringing yellow caution tape between two trees. Another man was unloading orange cones like we were about to host a parade. "You don't belong here," Celeste snapped. "This is under Maple Hollow authority." I took a slow sip of coffee just to keep myself from laughing. "Ma'am," I said calm, "this is my property." She didn't blink. "We've received reports of unauthorized occupation," she barked, loud enough for the neighbors gathering by the road to hear. "This is a compliance inspection." I looked around at her little crew. 2 SUVs with amber strobes, radios crackling, a fake sense of urgency floating in the air like cheap cologne. And I felt something familiar in my chest, that old itch from my younger years when people decided you were an easy target because you didn't walk around puffing your chest out. I used to be that kid teachers assumed was fine because I was quiet. The employee bosses overworked because I didn't complain. The man strangers talked over because I wasn't loud. And Celeste was looking at me the same way, like I'd fold. I set my coffee down on the hood of my car and pulled out my phone. "Good," I said, hitting record. "Let's do this on camera. You can explain why you're trespassing." Celeste's eyes narrowed. "Sir, if you refuse to cooperate, we will escalate to authorities." I smiled. "Please do. Real authorities. Because last time I checked, reflective vests don't come with police powers." That's when my moving truck rolled up to the gate. The driver leaned out the window and stared at the cones. Boss," he called. "I don't get paid enough for neighborhood wars." "You're fine," I said, waving him forward. Celeste snapped her fingers at her volunteers like she was directing a Broadway show. "No one unloads until I give clearance." One of her helpers shoved a sheet of paper toward me. Violation notice, he said. It looked official until I read the top. Community Compliance Report, Draft. Draft. In bold letters. I held it up so the neighbors could see. This is what you're calling law? I asked. A half-finished template? A few people on the shoulder snickered. Someone actually clapped once, then stopped when Celeste whipped her head around like a hawk. Celeste stepped closer, voice dropping into that sweet but deadly tone. This property is used by the community. We maintain it. You can't just show up and disrupt established operations. That line hit me in the gut, not because it was scary, but because it was audacious. The way she said it, like my family's land was a borrowed chair she'd been warming for me. I leaned in a little and said, "You're going to stop right now. Move the cones, remove the tape, and get off my land." Celeste's face twitched. For a second, I thought she might swing the clipboard. Instead, she hissed, "You'll regret this." She snapped her fingers again. Her volunteers scrambled, ripping down tape, scooping cones, climbing into SUVs. Engines roared. Amber lights faded down the road in a storm of dust, and the quiet that followed felt like the calm right before thunder. I didn't even get to enjoy the silence. The next morning, I walked the perimeter like my dad used to. Boots in wet grass, sunlight catching on the creek, birds doing their loud little morning gossip. Halfway down the fence line, I saw something that made me laugh out loud. A small metal sign screwed into my boundary post read, "Chairwoman, reserved parking." I stood there with my hands on my hips, laughing like a crazy person. Because what do you even do with that? Who claims a parking spot on someone else's land and sleeps at night? I took a photo. Proof. Then I kept walking and reached the old pump shed. Back in my childhood, it was just a cedar building with pipes humming inside. Now there was a shiny new padlock on the door. Not my padlock. I crouched, examined it, and felt that anger deepen into something colder. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was occupation. I tried the old key ring I'd found in Dad's desk drawer. Rusty keys stamped with numbers. One slid in and turned. The lock popped. The door creaked open, and stale air rushed out. Inside, it wasn't just pipes anymore. There was a metal filing cabinet against the back wall. A box of handheld radios on top, the same kind Celeste's crew used. A roll of yellow caution tape. A clipboard stack. Props. Like a little stage set. I pulled the filing cabinet open and found folders. Receipts. County letterhead. And then lease agreements. My stomach dropped as I flipped through them. Years ago, my dad had signed a simple facilities lease, a token agreement that allowed the neighborhood association to place their mailbox shelter and maintain the pump system access for a small monthly fee. Routine. Neighborly. Harmless. But tucked deeper in the folder were newer documents. Updated. Expanded. Renewed automatically. And the signature at the bottom wasn't my dad's. It was Celeste Brigham's. And the amounts weren't token anymore. They were thousands. Facility management fees, security operations, emergency oversight. All billed regularly. All justified as community safety. My land. Their bills. Her little empire. I started snapping photos, page after page, like each one was a bullet. Then I heard it, static crackling. A radio on the shelf had a blinking light. And someone was transmitting. "He's inside," a voice hissed. "He's documenting." Repeat, "He's inside." My whole body went hot-cold. I wasn't alone. I froze, listening, then stepped quietly to the doorway and scanned the tree line. Movement. A shadow ducking behind an oak. I shut the filing cabinet, locked the shed, and walked back toward the house calm and steady, because running gives people power. And I refused to give Celeste the satisfaction. When I got back, Tessa was waiting on my porch like she'd been expecting this. 2 mugs of coffee in her hands. One held out like a peace offering. "Morning stakeout?" she asked. I took the mug and said, "You were right. She's been running a whole operation out of my pump shed." I showed her the photos. Tessa's face hardened. "I've been treasurer for Maple Hollow for 2 years," she said, voice tight. "And I've been telling people the numbers don't make sense. Dues keep rising, but nothing improves." She always blamed liability and safety. I stared out at the meadow and felt something shift inside me, from anger to resolve. That feeling when you realize you're not just defending yourself anymore. You're exposing someone who has been bullying an entire community. So we did what bullies hate most. We brought receipts. Within 24 hours, word spread. And in a small town, word doesn't spread online first. It spreads at the feed store, the diner, the mailbox shelter. People gathered under that tin roof by the road, whispering like church ladies after a scandal. Celeste arrived with her clipboard, her lieutenant, a guy named Brock, hovering behind her with a neon vest and the radio. She put on her sweet leader voice. "Neighbors," she began, "we've had reports of suspicious activity and noncompliance. It is our duty to maintain standards." And then she did it. She pointed at me, like I was the problem. "Some individuals believe ownership exempts them from community responsibility," she said. Tessa stepped forward and held up a folder. "Celeste," she said clearly, "as treasurer, I'm requesting board approval records for the last $6,000 in spending. Radios, lights, patrol equipment, facility fees." The crowd murmured. A man in paint-stained overalls frowned. "Wait," he said, "what facility fees?" I pulled out my phone. "This facility," I said, showing the photos from inside the pump shed. "And these agreements, signed by Celeste. Renewed. Auto-charged. Without disclosure. On my land." The silence was instant. Like someone cut the sound. Then the questions exploded. "You mean we've been paying her to rent his land?" "That's not in the bylaws. My dues went up $400 this year." Celeste lifted her hands. Everyone calmed down. "This is being misrepresented." Tessa snapped her folder shut. "No," she said, voice sharp, "it's being exposed." That word hit like a gavel. Exposed. Celeste's face went red. She tried to pull rank. "This is private financial information." A grizzled old guy who ran the feed store leaned on the counter and said, "It stopped being private when you started spending other folks' money without asking." That's when I knew. The audience stopped clapping. The theater was collapsing. 2 days later, I called the sheriff. A deputy named Mark Delaney came out, calm and tired in that way cops get when they've seen too many petty power games turn dangerous. I told him about the fake patrols, the cones, the inspections, the radio chatter. He sighed. "That again," he said. "All right, don't do anything rash. I'll come by this afternoon." I didn't have to bait Celeste. She baited herself. She saw the sheriff's cruiser near my drive and still rolled up like she was about to win a showdown. Brock and the volunteers set up their little command post, radios crackling, amber lights spinning like a cheap carnival. Celeste strutted in, voice loud. "Deputy," she began, "this is HOA business. You have no jurisdiction." Deputy Delaney didn't flinch. He looked at the cones, looked at the fake badge Brock had pinned to his vest. Then he looked at me. "This is your land." "Yes, sir," I said. "Deed, taxes, survey." Delaney nodded like he'd already checked. Then he turned to Brock. "Where'd you get that badge?" Brock swallowed. "Compliance Volunteer Certification." "Certified by who?" Brock's eyes darted to Celeste. Celeste stepped in. "Our board." Delaney's voice stayed calm, but it cut through the air. "Ma'am, volunteers cannot present themselves as law enforcement, cannot conduct inspections, cannot block access on private property. That's impersonation territory." He held out his hand and Brock, looking like a kid caught stealing, handed over the badge. Delaney slid it into an evidence bag. The zip sound was loud. Final. Celeste's mask cracked for the first time. She tried the martyr angle. "I've sacrificed so much for this community," she said, voice trembling. "Without me, there would be chaos." From the crowd, someone muttered, "Looks like the chaos started with you." Tessa didn't even smile. She just handed Delaney a stack of receipts and said, "Here are the numbers. And I have proof those purchases weren't approved." Delaney looked at Celeste and said, "All unauthorized equipment off this property within 24 hours. Patrol activities suspended. If I hear about one more intimidation incident, charges are coming." Celeste nodded stiffly, jaw clenched, and walked back to her SUV like she was trying not to fall apart in front of everyone. And that should have been the end. But bullies don't go quietly. 3 nights later, I heard tires on gravel. Headlights swept across the meadow. Celeste's SUV slid to a stop by the pump shed. Amber lights flashed again, like she was trying to resurrect her throne with pure spite. She got out without the blazer this time, hair messy, clutching neon flyers. "Neighbors," she shouted into the night. "Don't be fooled. He's trying to steal our community facilities. He wants to shut down safety and bankrupt Maple Hollow." And then she slapped a flyer on the pump shed door. It fell right off, pathetic. Like her last attempt at control couldn't even stick to wood. By bad luck for her, or good luck for the truth, a couple of neighbors pulled up, drawn by the lights. Then more. Within minutes, she had an audience, just not the one she wanted. People stood there with arms folded, faces hard, watching her unravel. I walked closer, phone out, steady. "Celeste," I said, voice quiet. "You've already lost the board, the sheriff, and the community. What exactly is this supposed to do?" She whirled on me, eyes wild. "People respect strength," she snapped. "They need leadership." Tessa stepped forward, voice like ice. "That wasn't leadership. That was a scam." Someone from the crowd called out, "Leave, Celeste." Another voice added, "We're done." And for a moment, just a heartbeat, I saw it in her face, the realization that her tricks didn't work anymore. No applause, no fear, no automatic obedience. Just a group of people finally awake. Celeste's shoulders sagged. She looked around like she was searching for someone to back her up. Nobody moved. Then she muttered something under her breath, climbed into her SUV, and peeled out. Amber lights flashed once, then vanished down the road like a dying firefly. The next morning, the neighborhood held a meeting at the Grange Hall, not in a gravel lot, not under fake authority, but under fluorescent lights and the smell of coffee and old wood. Tessa stood up and said, "From now on, our budgets are open. Every expense is documented. No volunteer patrols. No intimidation." Then they looked at me, the outsider who technically owned the corner their mailbox shelter sat on. I cleared my throat and said, "My dad rented those facilities because he believed in being decent. I'll honor that. We'll create a fair agreement on paper, transparent, and nobody gets to pretend they have authority they don't." The room clapped. Not polite clapping, real clapping, grateful clapping. Over the next few weeks, the fake radios disappeared. The cones went away. The pump shed got a new lock, my lock. The sheriff's investigation moved forward, and Celeste did what people like her always do when they can't control the narrative anymore. She left town and told anyone who would listen that she was the victim of a hostile takeover. Here's where it gets messy, though, and why I'm ending this story the way I am. Because even after all of it, I started hearing whispers. He didn't have to make it public. She was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe. He embarrassed her. Like the real crime was refusing to be pushed. Like standing up for your own land is somehow mean if the bully has a nice smile and a clipboard. So I want to ask you, and I want you to be honest in the comments. If someone is lying, manipulating, taking money, and using fake authority to intimidate people, do you go quiet and handle it behind closed doors to keep the peace? Or do you drag it into the light even if it ruins somebody's reputation? Where's the line between being a good neighbor and being a doormat? And have you ever watched a community leader turn into a tyrant while everyone else just nodded along because it was easier? Drop your take below, because I'm telling you right now, the comments are where the real jury lives. If you like this story, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And if you've dealt with someone like Celeste, tell me what happened, because I swear these people all read from the same playbook. And the only way to beat that playbook is to compare notes.